Going underground should kill you. Think about it. No sunlight, no fresh air, no easy water, and the constant threat of the whole world collapsing on top of you. By every instinct we have, deep underground is where you go to die, not to live. And yet, in central Turkey, thousands of people didn't just hide in a cave for a night. They carved a permanent city 280 feet straight down into solid rock, 18 levels of homes and stables and kitchens and schools. And they lived in it, which means whatever was waiting for them, up on the surface, in the light and the open air, was so much worse than the dark and the depths that going down was the safe choice. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand what could terrify an entire people so completely that they chose to disappear into the earth, and the staggering genius it took to survive down there. Let me start with how the world found out this place even existed, because it is almost impossible to believe. In 1963, in an ordinary Turkish town called Derinkuyu, a man was renovating his home. He knocked down a wall in his basement, and behind it he found a tunnel. Not a hole, a tunnel, carved into the rock leading down into darkness. And when people followed it, that tunnel opened into another, and another, into rooms and halls and staircases spiraling deeper and deeper and deeper into the earth, beneath the town. What that man had accidentally broken into was a city. An entire underground city, sealed and abandoned and hidden directly beneath the feet of people who had lived above it for generations without ever knowing it was there. And the scale of it is staggering. This city plunges around 280 feet into the ground, deep enough to swallow a skyscraper. It has been mapped across as many as 18 separate levels, one beneath the other, connected by a maze of narrow tunnels and staircases. And it was big enough, by the estimates, to shelter as many as 20,000 people, not just people, but their livestock, their food stores, their entire way of life, all packed into the rock, hundreds of feet below the sun. This was not a hiding hole. This was a metropolis, built downward instead of upward. And the moment you understand that, the only question that matters is the one we started with. Why? What on earth would drive human beings to build something like this? The answer is fear. But to understand it, you have to understand where this place was. Central Turkey, the region called Cappadocia, sits at one of history's great crossroads. For thousands of years, it was a place armies marched through, a place caught between empires, fought over, raided, conquered again. If you were an ordinary person living on that land, your home sat directly in the path of a violence you had no power to stop. Armies came to take your food, your animals, your children, your life. Raiders swept through to burn and steal. And later, waves of people who lived there faced something just as deadly. Persecution, hunted for what they believed in eras when being the wrong religion could get your whole village slaughtered. On the surface, in the open, an ordinary family was helpless against any of this. There was no wall high enough, no army of their own to call. When the killing came, and it came again and again across the centuries, they had only two options: die or disappear. And understand, this wasn't a one-time disaster they had to survive once. This was the shape of life on that land for generation after generation. The armies didn't come and then stop forever. They came and passed, and years later came in. Different empires, different raiders, different banners, but always the same terror rolling over the horizon. The dust, the smoke, the screaming, the taking. A person born in that region grew up knowing, in their bones, that at some point in their life, the killing would come for their town, the way we grow up knowing winter will come. It was not a question of if, but when. And a people who live under a threat like that, again and again, don't just react to it. They plan for it. They build their whole society around surviving it. The underground city wasn't a panic response thrown together the morning the raiders appeared. It was there, waiting, dug and ready, long before it was needed. Because these people had learned, through unbearable experience, that the only way to survive the surface was to have somewhere to go when the surface became a graveyard. And they found a third dimension to disappear into. Not out, across dangerous open country where they'd be run down. Not up, where there was nowhere to hide. But down, into the one place an army couldn't easily follow. Picture the day it was used. It is dawn, and a lookout comes running into the town. He has seen it on the horizon, the dust rising, the glint of metal. Raiders. But the people don't scatter in panic, and they don't grab spears to make a hopeless last stand in the open. They've done this before. Calmly, quickly, they move. Hidden doors open, in the floors of their homes, in the backs of storerooms, in places an outsider would never find. And the whole town begins to pour downward families, carrying bundles of food, mothers with infants, the old helped along by the young, driving their goats and their chickens ahead of them into the dark. One by one, 20,000 people vanish into the ground beneath their own houses. The great stone doors roll shut behind them. And when the raiders finally sweep in at midday, swords drawn, they find a ghost town. Empty houses, cold hearths, not a soul, not an animal, not a sack of grain, as if the entire population had simply evaporated into the air. They have no idea that beneath their feet, hundreds of feet down, 20,000 people are standing in silence in the lamplight, waiting behind walls of stone for the danger to pass. That was the whole point, not to fight the army, to make an entire town disappear. And they had one incredible gift that made it possible: the ground itself. The rock beneath Cappadocia is a soft volcanic stone called tuff, formed from the ash of ancient eruptions. And this rock has a magical property. When it is freshly exposed, it is soft enough to carve with simple hand tools, almost like hard clay, but once it is exposed to air, it hardens, growing strong and stable. You could dig into it with the tools you had, shaping rooms and tunnels by hand, one basketful of stone at a time, and the walls you carved would then harden into something solid and lasting, strong enough to hold up the ceiling above your head without collapsing. The land these people lived on was, in effect, begging to be carved. It was the perfect place on Earth to build a secret world beneath your feet. And if this is already pulling you in, if the idea of a hidden city carved by hand beneath an ordinary town is lighting up your imagination, then do me one favor. Tap that subscribe button right now. This channel is for people who want the real story of where we came from, not the cartoon version. The people who want to understand the astonishing things ordinary humans did to survive. You belong here. Now stay with me, because carving a hole in soft rock is one thing. Keeping 20,000 people alive down there, sealed in the dark while an army hunts for you above, is another thing entirely. And this is where these people reveal themselves to be not desperate refugees, but some of the most brilliant engineers of the ancient world, because to survive underground, they had to solve 4 impossible problems, and if they got any one of them wrong, everyone died. The first problem is the one that should have killed them fastest: air. Think about it. Cram thousands of people and their animals into sealed chambers hundreds of feet underground, and they will burn through the breathable air terrifyingly fast. In a sealed space that size, the air goes bad, and when it does, everyone suffocates in the dark. This alone should have made an underground city impossible. And it is worse than just running out of air, because bad air kills you quietly, without warning. As breathable air is used up in a sealed space, and the air people breathe out builds up, the effects creep in unseen: headaches, drowsiness, confusion, a slow dimming of the mind, until people simply fall asleep and don't wake up. There is no dramatic struggle, no moment to fix it. A whole chamber of people could quietly slip away in the dark and never know it was happening. So for a city meant to hold 20,000 people and their animals for weeks at a time, getting the air right wasn't one problem among many. It was the asterisk problem. The one that could turn the entire refuge into a mass grave in a single night. Everything else they built depended on solving this first, and the solution these builders came up with is so sophisticated, it still works today. Thousands of years later, they cut ventilation shafts, more than 50 of them. Narrow vertical channels driven from the surface, all the way down through every single level to the deepest chambers at the bottom. And these weren't just holes. They were an engineered breathing system. Cool, fresh air sinks down through the shafts while warm, stale air rises and escapes, creating a constant, gentle, natural current of fresh air flowing through the entire city, powered by nothing but the physics of temperature down there. Today, hundreds of feet below the surface, you can still feel a soft breeze moving through the tunnels. These people built a set of lungs for their city out of solid rock, and those lungs are still breathing. But air was only the first problem, because even with perfect air, a sealed-in population dies fast without the second thing. Water, and water underground is a nightmare, for a reason you might not expect. Yes, you need a source, but the deadlier problem is your enemy. Because the first thing a besieging army does is find your water and poison it. If your water came from the surface, all an attacker had to do was drop something foul down the well, and everyone below would die of thirst or sickness, trapped in the dark. So the builders of this city did something genius. They dug their wells deep into the rock to tap hidden underground water. And crucially, they designed those wells so they could only be reached from inside the city. The shafts didn't open to the surface where an enemy could get at them. From up top, there was nothing to poison, because the water source was invisible and sealed away below. The people underground had all the clean water they needed, drawn from the deep earth, completely beyond the reach of the army standing on top of them. The enemy could sit up there for weeks and never once touch the thing that was keeping the city alive. So now they can breathe and they can drink. But an underground city is useless if the enemy can simply follow you down the stairs and slaughter you in the tunnels. Which brings us to the third problem, and the most ingenious of all, defense. And the defenses of this place are a masterpiece of deadly cleverness. Start with the doors. At key points throughout the tunnels, the builders carved enormous circular stone doors, great wheels of solid rock, some of them weighing as much as half a ton. These doors sat in carved niches in the tunnel wall, and when danger came, defenders could roll one across the passage from the inside, sealing the tunnel completely, like a giant stone plug. And here is the brutal genius of it. These doors could only be operated from the inside. An attacker on the other side couldn't get a grip on them, couldn't roll them back, couldn't budge half a ton of stone blocking a narrow tunnel. There was even a small hole carved through the center of each door, so the defenders could see through and thrust spears through at anyone trying to break in, while remaining completely protected. But the doors were only the beginning. The tunnels themselves were weapons. They were deliberately carved low and narrow, so tight that an intruder had to bend down and squeeze through in single file, one person at a time, hunched over and unable to fight. Now imagine you're an invading soldier. You've somehow gotten past a stone door. You're crawling, alone, bent double, through a pitch-black tunnel, barely wider than your shoulders, unable to see, unable to raise a weapon, unable to move fast. And you emerge, one at a time, helpless, into a chamber, where the defenders are standing upright, armed, waiting, and ready. You would be killed the instant you appeared, and the soldier behind you would crawl into the same death, one after another. The city was designed so that its own hallways turned an army's greatest strength, its numbers, into a useless single-file line of easy targets. And then there is the final layer of defense, the one that shows just how deeply these people had thought this through. The city wasn't one open space. It was divided into sections, and each section could be sealed off from the others with its own doors. So even if attackers somehow fought their way into the upper levels, the defenders could simply seal the passage below them and retreat deeper, abandoning the top of the city, dropping down another level, sealing another door, and pulling the whole population further into the earth where the enemy could not follow. The city was a puzzle box with the people hidden at the center, and every door the enemy broke through only revealed another sealed door, and another going down into the dark. It was very nearly impossible to conquer, so they could breathe, they could drink, they could defend. But there is a fourth problem, and it is the one that turns this from a bunker into something astonishing. Because you can't just survive down there for a night. A siege could last weeks, so they didn't just build a shelter. They built an asterisk home. Asterisk, and this is the part that gives me chills. Because when you go down into this city, you don't just find tunnels and doors, you find life. You find kitchens, with ceilings still blackened by the soot of ancient cooking fires. You find great storage rooms for grain and supplies, enough to feed thousands through a long siege. You find presses for making wine and oil. You find stables carved into the upper levels where they kept their animals, and the warmth of those animal bodies helped heat the levels above. You find a room with a beautiful vaulted ceiling that appears to have been a school. You find a church carved deep into the rock where people could still pray while they hid from the world. Think about what that means. These people didn't just crawl into the dark to wait out death. They brought their whole civilization down with them. Their food, their animals, their craft, their learning, their faith. They built a place where a child could be born, fed, taught, and raised to adulthood entirely beneath the surface of the earth, in the light of oil lamps, while empires clashed overhead. That is not the act of frightened animals. That is the act of a people who refused, absolutely refused, to let anything, not armies, not raiders, not the darkness itself, erase them. And don't underestimate what it took to simply endure down there, because the hardest enemy might have been the mind itself. Imagine days, maybe weeks, sealed in near total darkness. No sunrise to mark the morning, no sky, no horizon, just the same stone walls and the flicker of oil lamps, the smell of smoke and animals and too many people packed close, the muffled silence of hundreds of feet of rock pressing in on every side. You couldn't know what was happening above you. Were the raiders still there? Had they found the entrance? Would it be safe to go up tomorrow, or in a week, or ever? That kind of waiting blind and helpless in the dark breaks people, and yet they endured it, And they endured it asterisk together asterisk, which was the secret. The school, the church, the shared meals, the ordinary rhythms of life carried on underground weren't just practical. They were what kept a trapped population from falling apart. They gave people something to do, something to believe, a reason to hold on until the doors could safely roll open again and let the sunlight back in. Surviving down there wasn't only an engineering problem. It was a test of the human spirit passed in the dark. Let me take you down through it, level by level, the way they lived it. You enter through a hidden door in a house on the surface and descend into the upper levels first. And here is where they kept the animals, the stables carved right into the rock, because the beasts were heavy and you didn't want to drive them too deep, and their body heat drifted upward and warmed the levels around them. Go down further, and you reach the working heart of the city, the kitchens, their ceilings, still black with the soot of countless fires, the smoke carefully channeled away so it wouldn't choke the tunnels or give away the city's position from the surface. Nearby, the great storage rooms, stacked with grain and dried food, the fuel that let thousands outlast a siege, presses for wine and oil. Deeper still, past narrow staircases and more stone doors, you find the places that fed the soul as much as the body. A hall that served as a school, and carved deep into the rock near the lowest levels. A church, where people gathered in the lamplight to pray, while somewhere far above their heads, their homes were being ransacked. Every level had its purpose. Every level was thought through. It was a vertical city, as organized and alive as any town on the surface, just wrapped in stone and hidden from the sun. Now, who actually built this? And here the honest answer is that some of it is a genuine mystery. The best evidence suggests the first tunnels were begun very long ago, likely by an early people of the region carving out the soft rock thousands of years back. And then, over many centuries, wave after wave of people who lived on that land expanded it, digging deeper, adding levels, especially in later eras when communities fleeing persecution enlarged the city into the vast refuge we see today. It wasn't built by one people in one lifetime. It was inherited and expanded and passed down, generation after generation adding to it, each one deepening the shelter their descendants would one day need. Which means this city is not just a feat of engineering, it is a message across time, from parents to children they would never meet. Asterisk when the danger comes, and it will come. Here is where you go. We dug it deeper for you. Asterisk, so let's kill the myth you might have walked in with. That going underground was a primitive, desperate act, frightened people scratching holes to cower in. Nothing could be further from the truth. This was one of the most calculated, sophisticated survival strategies in all of human history. Going down wasn't the desperate choice. It was the smart choice, the one move on the whole board that could keep an unarmed farming community alive against an army it could never hope to defeat in the open. They couldn't outfight the empires that swept across their land, so they thought them. They turned the very ground beneath their feet into a fortress, a life support system, and a weapon, all at once. And they did it with hand tools and human ingenuity, thousands of years ago. And think about what that says about us, as a species, faced with an unstoppable force. A people with no army and no power didn't simply die. They looked at the one place no one else thought to go, straight down, and they built an entire world there. When the surface belonged to the strong, they made the depths belong to the clever. Every ventilation shaft, every hidden well, every half-ton stone door, every soot-stained kitchen 280 feet underground is a monument to the same stubborn thing that has carried our kind through every disaster in our history: the absolute refusal to give up and disappear. They didn't disappear. They went down into the earth, and they waited, and they lived, and their city is still there, still breathing, thousands of years later, waiting to tell us how they did it. So the next time you feel the walls closing in on your own life, remember what ordinary people once did when the whole world above them turned deadly. They didn't panic, and they didn't surrender. They picked up their tools, and they carved a way through, down into solid rock, one basketful of stone at a time, building a place to survive the unsurvivable. That resilience, that refusal, that impossible cleverness under pressure, it is the same thing that lives in you. It is the reason your ancestors made it through, again and again, so that you could be here at all. But this hidden city raises one final question that historians still argue about, because Derinkuyu was not alone. Beneath that same region of Turkey lie hundreds of other underground settlements, and some of them may have been connected to each other by miles of tunnel, forming a hidden network under the land that has never been fully mapped. So what was really going on beneath Cappadocia? and how much of that buried world is still waiting, undiscovered, beneath the soil. That is the story we open next.